So fortunately, when we finished last time, we finished up to the Mishnah on Mem Amud Aleph, which is, there's actually two Mishnahs, but the upper Mishnah on Mem Amud Aleph is where we're going to start. But before we start, and again, this Mishnah now deals with the question of if you're a shomer or you have someone else's produce in storage, what is the halacha, what is it in when you have to return it if there's shrinkage? And there's always some kind of a shrinkage, the Gemara tells us, whether it's in the winter or the summer, depending on the seasonal aspects. So what do you return? If I give you 100 pounds of something, are you responsible to return 100 pounds? Or is there some offset that is allowed as a result of conditions? And we'll see what those conditions are. Now, we were first treated to this subject a few blot earlier. If you'll remember, on Lamed Ches Amud Aleph, we were discussing the whole question of whether or not if someone gives payers to someone to hold and they start deteriorating, there's a machlekes between the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, whether or not you have an obligation to sell off the property, the produce that is, in order to salvage something for the mafkid, for the one who gave you the property to hold. So that was that discussion. And in that discussion, the Gemara brought down Rabbi Bar Chana, Rabbi Yochanan, who says, and we won't go through the whole thing, but he says that the whole machlokes is whether or not you're responsible to salvage someone's property bichdei chisoron, within the sort of the limits of what is normal for shrinkage. So, and Rashi there said that we're going to be talking about that a little bit later on, and this is the later on. So just to give you that little bit of a background, so the question was, if there's a certain amount of shrinkage, are you responsible to immediately sell the produce to salvage, which is what Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, or the Tanna Kama, who says, no, you're not mechuyev to do anything, and if it's going to start deteriorating, then that's the way it is. Of course, the Gemara went on to say that that's the machlokes, but everybody agrees that if the shrinkage starts increasing to the point of where it's beyond the normal shrinkage, then even Rabbi Shimon, then even the Tanna Kama admit, no, sell it right away because you don't want him to have a huge loss. So there was a difference between normal shrinkage and shrinkage that is beyond normal. All right, those are the discussions that we had then. Now we're going to get into it a little bit more detail on Mem Amud Aleph, and I'm going to say as follows: a mafki peretz esel chavero. If Reuven gives Shimon peretz to hold for him, then there are certain chesronos, certain shrinkage, which is expected, and therefore it's normal if when Shimon gives it back to Reuven, he gives him back minus that chisaron, that shrinkage. So now, okay, so for our purposes, the Mishnah is now going to enumerate the chitim or the ores, for wheat and ores, the machlokes ores, we call ores rice. It's otherwise referred to as millet, which may be something similar to rice. I'm not quite sure that I've ever eaten millet, but whatever millet, the sort of it's a Gemara definition of millet, but ores is also rice. We say tisha chatzi kabin lekur. Then the measurement in those days was by kur. So we say it's 9.5 kabin for a kur. And memory serves, I think there was, I don't know if it was, I can't remember what the actual measurement, how many kabin there are in a kur, maybe 150, 100 and something, a kabin likur. So in other words, that's the normal shrinkage, 9.5 kabin likur. Lisorin, barley, ledochen, and dochen, I think is also, I don't know if it's spelt or with another grain. I don't think that I've ever, I mean, the term spelt is one of the grains. I'm not sure what spelt is, or what kind of grain it is, but it's a grain that was obviously common in the time of the Mishnah. And so we had to account for it. Tisha kabin likur. It's only 9 kabin to the likur. What does that mean?
Is this on the honor system, Rabbi? When the shomer, when he returns it, and he's claiming there's X amount of shrinkage. How do we know that he just didn't put X amount aside for his own uses rather than depletion through shrinkage? Is it just the honor system if he says so?
Yeah, something. It's a good question, but it kind of is the honor system because we don't necessarily expect that someone is gonna steal or convert that small amount of grain and turn it back. So we say we know historically, we know from year to year, from time to time, that's what happens when you keep grain together over a period of time. Then, and this, by the way, has to do with the achbarim, really, with the mice, because they kept it in silos or other things where there were mice, and the mice would eat it. It didn't just disappear on its own. So it was usually mice that ate it. So you have to say that the mice have a certain chelik, and therefore historically they know that it's 9 kabin to the core or 9.5 kabin to the core, and we don't worry about is he going to take a kernel or 3, something like that. So yeah, we assume that that's correct. We assume that. Okay. Now.
Okay, so to translate this a little bit, I'm looking up here. So
yeah,
according to Wikipedia, but I think it's reliable in this type of a thing. So I've seen these tables elsewhere. So there's 180.
180.
Right,
Okay.
180 cob in a core.
To a core, right.
Right. So if we have 9 and 3 saw is 18, 1 saw is 6 cob.
It's about 2%. 2%.
Well, no, this is a little more than that. So a saw is 6 cob. So we have 3 saw, that's really 18 cob. And then we have these others is 9 and 9.5 cob. 18 cob would be 10%. 9 cob would be 5%. So that's the sort of numbers we're looking at. It's a lot more than 2%.
Okay. All right. So again, in other words, that was what was expected, that over a period of time. Now, we're going to see Rashi in a minute. So let's just finish, then we'll go to Rashi, because Rashi is going to tell us something inclusive here. Lukusmin, Luzera Pishdan. So Kusmin is actually also a grain, whether it's spelt or something else. Zerapishtan is flax, right? Kusmin, Zerapishtan. Those types of, so these were the regular types of materials that or grains that were harvested, and so he asked him to watch these. Then there's a different measure. It's shalosh sa'in likur. There we're talking about a different kind of measure. It's not kabin, it's sa'in likur. So 3 saw for a kur. I think there's 30 saw in a kur. So there you have 10%. So now here's the key. According to the Tanakama, hakol lefi hamida, hakol lefi hazman. There are 2 running characteristics of this type of situation of shmira. One is the midah, the measure, and the other is the time. What does that mean? That means, Rich, to your question, if a person holds it for 1 year, is shmira, and it happens to be wheat, then it's 9.5 kabin to the kur for 1 year. If he holds it for 2 years, then you double it. It's 9.5 kabin times 2 and 2 years. So in other words, this is not a finite number. It's a running total to the point when he returns it. So as long as he has it, he's starting to take off slices of this wheat until he returns it. So Rashi says, he should reduce kama heim regilim lachzer ubegamara mukala b'sha'arvin in perosa. This is very important. Rashi says here that our situation deals with a case where the shomer mixes his own produce with the produce given to him to watch. This is very significant, which, by the way, is against the halacha. The halacha says you may not do it, but he did it anyway. So he took his own produce, which was in this silo. He just added the other stuff. It's all in one pile now. And now we have to sort it out. Okay. Orez, says Rashi, is mill. That's the millet that they talk about, but it's also rice. Dochen, Petil, the Doma Orez. It's similar to Orez. Says Rashi, Hakol lefi hamida, v'chein l'chol kur v'kur. For every kur, you follow the measurement. In other words, if you have 1 kur, it's 9.5. If you have 2 kur, it's times 2. If you have 10 kur, it's times 10. You multiply it by the number of kur, and it's simply a fraction. It's X percent of X number of kur. And then Rashi Hakol lefi hazman. In other words, as the calendar flips from one year to the next, we start again. 9.5 kabim to the kur, or 9 kabim to the kur, or 9 to the kur, depending on what it is. So if he's holding it for a longer period of time, then you have 2 equations that you have to multiply in order to get to the amount of shrinkage that will happen. Okay, that's how the Gemara, that's how the Tanna Kama looks at this, and this way it makes it fair for the Shomer that this way he doesn't have to start counting every kernel, because there is a sort of an objective determination that for wheat it'll be 9.5, or for our.
All right, little question.
Yeah.
If let's say you start with 1 core of grain when you harvest it. During the first year, you're allowed, let's say, depending on the thing, it varies, but let's say 9 cob, okay, 5%. The guy hasn't returned yet. He's on this long trip. Maybe he'll come back next year. So you keep the stuff in the silo. Now you're down to 171. Is the amount now for the next year you get another 9 cob is allowed as standard shrinkage? Is that off of the original 180 because we have what was a core's worth of grain at harvest, or is it really 5% of the 171?
It's for discussion purposes here, it's 5 of the original number. It's not of the reduced number. You're not going to start de minimis and say now.
Right. I mean, it could go either way. That's what I was asking.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So
that's
typically the way what the Gemara Shita here is we're going to take a number, and that number is going to be the sort of the top line consistently all the way through, and we're not going to start doing mathematics and figuring out it'll get too complicated for the for the parties. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
But that gets proportionately much higher as the time goes by.
That's right. It will be higher because you're going to be taking the percentage over a smaller amount. Correct. So therefore, the Gemara says.
But he's 9 years. He's got really nothing.
Right, which is again why I think we start with that first number. We keep that as a constant, and then we start subtracting percentages from that constant.
Well, with all that, how long is he required to keep it? How long does he have?
Yeah, all right. So that's yet a different question, which we saw from the previous Mishnah when we were talking on Lamed Ches, that there's a machlokes tanoim as to whether or not he has an obligation to sell it. And I think at the end of the maskana there was that even the Manda Amar, the Tanna Kama, who said you shouldn't sell it, at some point when it's eroding to the point where there's going to be much less left, then the whole question is, can he salvage anything for the person who gave him control, because there was no instruction. So at that point, again, that's the whole machlokes of the Gemara. May he then sell it to salvage something? So that question really we addressed in the previous Mishnah, back and forth. And we have different mandamim and different shitas, but yeah, basically here the question is not so much. Here the question is a little bit different. The question is, how much should you take it? You're ready to take it off. How much are you ready to take it off? So according to the Tanna Kama, we have a constant, 9 kabin, 9.5 kabin, 3 saw, whatever it is, and you measure that, and then you also measure for every year. For every year, you do that calculation again. So that's the Tanna Kama. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri has a terrific kasha. You're going to tell me that, okay, we have an objective and we follow that objective all the way through until it's finished. if the whole point here is to preserve it from the mice who are in these silos and who nibble at this produce and they're going to wither it away. What are you telling me? You've given me an objective number, and we're going to use that number, 9, 9.5, whatever it is. Do the mice care if I have 10 kur or 5 kur or 20 kur? They're going to eat what they're going to eat. Why do you give me an objective number and tell me that's the number, and then every year you do the same thing? The achbarim will eat what they eat and no more. So are they going to eat more because you have 10 kur as opposed to 5? Certainly not. So how can you take an objective number and say, this is how we're going to treat shrinkage? We're going to multiply it by the amount and then double that by the number of years. But the achbarim aren't clued in that they're supposed to eat 9.5 kav for every kur. If there's 20 kur, they may only still eat 9.5 or 10 or whatever it is.
Doesn't it depend on the number of mice that happen to be there?
The number of mice also.
Yeah, if they see all that grain, they might tell their friends.
Yeah, they tell their friends, then we'll have a feast. Right, exactly. But the principle of the question is, how can you have an objective number that you're going to constantly repeat when the achbarim aren't going to participate in that equation? They're not going to sit in the classroom and realize that they have to eat 9.5 times 5 now instead of just times 3 or something along those lines.
Right. Tosfos says they don't have enough room to hide. If it's so depleted, they won't have enough room to hide. The mice,
yes.
They'll eat less.
Yeah, that's right. You're absolutely right. And that's the flip side of the question is there going to be at some point anything for them to eat, because it's going to be depleted to the point where they won't even eat the minimum of what they would eat
Right.
in a sitting. So yeah, but the more important question is the other one, because here we have the silo full of grain and you're telling me that these are the numbers, and I'm telling you these numbers don't make sense as Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, because the rats don't, I mean the mice don't operate that way. So he says, so he says something different, and he says that you only count 1 kur. In other words, whether it's 5 kabin or 10 kabin, if he holds it for a year, all you deduct is 9.5 kabin for that, for the, regardless the number of kur in the silo. That's his chiddush, that you don't multiply for each, you multiply it one time, because again, when you ask that question, there must be some historical data that says the mice will eat so much and so much in. That's how, I mean, that's why they came up with these numbers. It probably wasn't random. They saw historically that's what happens. So if that's what happens, that's what we're going to charge them. However, you do charge by the year. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri doesn't, he allows the double if it's by year. So if you're holding it 2 years, then you get 9.5 twice. Just like the Tanna Kama says, you get 9.5 per kur twice. According to Rabbi Nuri, you get 9.5 twice. So that's his machlokes on the Tanna Kama. Let's see what Rashi says. So we now have 2 views on this question, and obviously I mean, we can't make light of it, because in those days this was an important. This was very important. I mean, people were keeping their foodstuffs, and they had to rely on these granaries. And it was costing them a lot of money to store. They didn't have it in their backyard. So it's not just frivolous, it's meaningful. That's the point. Okay, okay. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, Omer, says Rashi, hakol lefi hamida poli. So he is arguing on the whole and on the midah, saying it's one time. All right, so now we have a play machlokes between Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Comes Rabbi Yehuda, and he gives a third shita, or a third view in this matter. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, midah meruba. If there was a substantial amount, we'll see what that means in a minute. If there was a substantial amount in the silo, chiddush, then nupshat, we do not discount anything. You don't take anything away, because there is a certain expansion that a large amount of grain will have, and we'll understand why we say that in a few minutes. So we say that the loss is offset by the expansion. So whatever the reason for the expansion, which we'll talk about, it's enough to offset the loss. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, you give him back what he gave you. If he gave you 10 kabin, if he gave you 10 kur, you give him back 10 kur. You don't start reducing it by 9.5, or saw in the case of other kinds of things. So that's yet another chiddush, that Meruba has a different shita than everything else. So let's see Rashi. Mida Meruba shehifkid etzel harbe. Here, Ubegemar Mefarish, Ubegemar explains Yud Kurim. If he gave him 10 kur, that's considered a substantial amount. Lo yotzele chasronas. There is no shrinkage, no depletion. Why? Meshehem mosiros shebiyamos hagoren shemafkid hachitin yeveshin, because he gives it to him. Typically, you get it to him after the harvest season, so it's been dried out by the sun. Ubachilas achbarim, and by the what the achbarim, what the mice eat, and in the chosron kol kach l'chol kur v'kur, he says it doesn't deplete all that much. The kulahai the achla achbarim the yud kurin hilkach lefichoso mashlemesh chisaron hamagil l'shnei kurim or shlosha sheha achbarim ochlen. The expansion will offset that amount. That, and again, you'll ask, is it an exact? I don't know that it's an exact science that you could know that they'll eat X and the expansion is Y and X equals Y. I don't think we're being as specific as that, but we're saying, you know what, be'erech, there isn't much of a change, so we're not going to start quibbling. He gives him back minus this, minus that. If it's a seasonal thing, you give him back what he gave you. So in principle, before we get into the Gemara, that's the way the discussion goes. Either you count according to the Tanna Kama by year and by the number of kur. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says no. You make one size fits all. It's one kur, and therefore one you charge one time, but you do charge by the year. And Rabbi Yehuda says that if you have a substantial amount, he doesn't even address the first two issues, but if you have a substantial amount, he says there's no offset at all because this whole thing doesn't apply. It only applies to smaller amounts where the achbarim actually make a difference because they eat enough to so that the nifkat shouldn't be on the short end here, that he's giving back more than he got because there is national shrinkage. Okay, so that's the machlokes in the Gemara. Now,
Rabbi, this is all assuming that he's mixing it with his own product, or
that's very important, right? So Rashi says because the halacha is he shouldn't mix. If you're a shomer, you should keep everything separate, so not to mix with your own. But if he happened to mix, now it comes into the equation: how much was his? In other words, you're going to see that the Gemara is going to have that discussion. How much of it was his, and how do we extract his from the amount that has to go back? It's not that simple. We'll see why in a minute. But yes, this assumes that there was a mixture of his own and of the that which he was asked to hold.
Now, if it was kept separately, does he still have to do this measurement? If he just
again, the Gemara is going to tell us that's the point. If it was separate, he gives back whatever in the bin. That's right. Then he's no more achrayas to worry about 9.5, 9, this, that, the other. He just gives whatever's there is there. Meaning, if the achbarim ate or didn't eat, that's not on me. I just did you a favor and I held it for you. You either paid me or didn't, whatever the case was. But I don't have to worry about how much I'm supposed to give you back because it's all in the silo. But the problem is that he did what the halacha told him not to do. Told him not to mix, and he mixed.
Okay.
It's always, you know, shilas always come up when you don't do what you're asked to do. Then of course you have a problem. So the Gemara asks a couple of questions here, which we're going to go through. In fact, the Gemara Orez Tuva Chaser. As a general matter, why are you telling me that? What does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says chitim and oriz is tisha chatzi kaven. I happen to know that oriz is much more, says the Gemara. So the mandam of the Gemara. it's more than 9.5. Why are you saying 9.5? It's a difference between whether the rice was in a raw state or in a refined state. In other words, what happens with rice? You have to wash it and peel it. You have to do certain things to it. So he says that there is a different when it's in its raw state, then the amount of shrinkage is greater. When it's already being refined, it's less. So our Mishnah, he says, deals with refined rice where you already have. That's why it's 9.5. Presumably, if it was not refined, it would be more. So that's just an aside discussion. Okay. Now, Lekusman and Lazera Pishtan, Gimel Son Lekur. Then we have a different cheshbon for Kusman, for spelt, and for flax seeds. Then it's not by kabin, it's by soin. So he says Gimel Son Lekur. It's 3 son for the kur. Okay, so that's just a different measurement we use. Okay. And again, in those days, those were significant to us. We're not farmers, but in any event, between a saw, there's less saw in the kur than there is kabin, so you have to use
6 cob in a saw.
What's that?
A saw is 6 cob, so it's the same as saying
it's
18 cob.
Right. All right. So we're dealing with different measurements depending on what and I'm not sure why one grain is measured one way or the other. There must be
Well, I think it's the amount. When we were dealing with 9.5, 9 could be those would all be fractional saws,
right.
And so, but once we get already to 18 cob, that's a nice round multiple of saw. So it makes sense to switch the
to switch it to a different. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay, so in other words, he's going to bring a raya from a brisa, where there's another brisa that also uses these measurements, that says that kusman and zerapishtan. Okay, so there's 2 different circumstances that the Gemara is talking about. You're talking about the raw kusman or the kusman that's in its husk. So in other words, the Gemara asks, Kasha here, you're telling me, but Orez, it's much more. So I'm telling you, it's a difference in whether it was refined or not refined. The kusma zerapishtan, zerapishtan begvulin, shani. We're talking about zerapishtan that are still in the husk, and therefore in the husk, they dry out, and then there's a lot less left inside. Tanya nami hacha, a brisa, the kusma zerapishtan begvulin. It's talking about gevulin where they are in their husk, and therefore, by the time it comes out as the natural seed, there's a lot more that gets sort of blown away or lost. And by orez that is not refined, it's shlosha solakur. Again, these are all. The Gemara is giving us a little bit of an understanding that there are different ways of harvesting these things. So it's not apples to apples. If you see that it happens to be 9.5 kabin as opposed to a larger amount, it all depends in what form he gave it to him. So if he gives it to him in a form where it's going to dry up and the husk and everything is going to wither away, he's not mechuyev to give him back the full amount of everything that he got with the husk, because the husk would naturally blow away, so he has to give him back less. Anyway, it's just an instruction.
So what it means also is that we are dealing with multiple types of shrinkage.
Exactly.
We talked specifically about the mice, but we're also talking about things blowing away, things drying up, and so on. Right.
So, and Rashi says that zera pishtin begvulin choser kol kach, it loses more lefisha hagvulin mechayvoshin, they dry v'noflin v'haruach mishnasman, and the wind blows them away, right? Avozera pishta naki ain't a chaser kol kach, but a simple seed, it doesn't shrink all that much because all of the exterior is already gone. So as you point out, Nasha, it all depends on what state he gets it, and then what happens to it while he's holding. Okay, so good to know that in that agrarian society they had rules so that people didn't get no pun intended, get shafted. When they take in somebody's food stuff, they wind up getting hit with a penalty because they have to give back more than they got. Okay, I call the Fimida. Everything is according to the measure. Tana kain l'chol kur v'kur v'chein l'chol shana v'shana. So it's measured by the amount, the kur, and by year. So for every year you multiply again. This is all the Tanakama. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. So comes Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, and he tells us no. The Achbarim don't really care what goes on. For them it's one size fits all. So you can't measure it the way you Tanakama want to do it. So and what's the reasoning? Tanya Omalo Rabbi Yochanan Harba Ovdos Mehen Harba Misporis Mehen. In other words, what's the reasoning? Why does he say that? So it's interesting. He says it because when the Achbar eats it, it's not just the Achbar nibbling at the food and that's it. There's, besides the actual eating, there's other parts of the food that gets destroyed, that gets ruined, that gets rotted as a result of that eating. In other words, it's not just, okay, he nibbles 3 pieces, and those are the 3 pieces that you take off. So there's extraneous damage that the Achbar does, and that's why he says, I'm not going to depart from the way I calculate, because it isn't just one-on-one. He eats one, and you subtract one. So again, this is a little bit of a science and understanding what happens when the Achbar gets in there. He does more damage than just the eating, simply because he's there, and there's other damage to the grain other than the straight eating. Okay, so that's so therefore the Tanakama says I can't. That's why I stick with my gun. Okay, Tana b'medvar ma'murim. David, to your question, she'irvin in peirosa, which is what Rashi says it happens here, is he takes the produce and he mixes it with his own peiros. Therefore, we have all these calculations. Ava yachad lo keren zavius, if he designates a corner, keren zavius is a corner of his own silo. Amalo harisholachol lefanecha. Here, whatever it is, I didn't touch it. It's in here. Take it and take it back. And if it happens to be more or less, that's not on me, it's on you. So that's so again, and that's what it should be, because why should this guy get into all kinds of issues with his neighbor? He should do what's right. The problem is either didn't have the space, or for whatever reason he says, no big deal, I'm just going to mix it with mine and then give him back. Now we have all of these problems. All right, so now, okay, so Frank the Gemara, what's the big deal? Okay, he didn't do what Chazal told him. He mixed it with his own payers. But we have a solution. Lechsa l'didei kama haven. Let's just go back and see, what did you give him? You gave him 5 kur. I had 1 kur. So he had 5/6. What's left? 5/6. Here's your 5/6, and I'll keep mine 1/6. In other words, why are we making such a big deal about this? Let's just do the fractional math and give him the percentage that's left of what's left. So even though he shouldn't have done it, my hava lechsa today, kama hava. And for the Gemara mistapik mehem. No, the reason why we have a problem is because during the course of the year, he took the shomer took from that food. So by taking from that food, let's say to eat or whatever he needed, now he's messed up the proportions. It's not just so simple. I wrote down on the chart, you gave me 5, I had 1. Wait a minute, I took, so now there's a quarter missing, a half missing. But right away, the Gemara says, what's the big deal? Let's just see what he took and do the same fraction. You're telling me, oh, no, you can't do it because he took some stuff out. So let's account for what he took out and do the same math. This is not, again, rocket science.
But there's a complication. Because Let's make it simple. I had one core of mine and one core of the other guy. I put them all in my silo, and now in the middle of the year, I took off. I took
quarter of a
out
core.
a half a core
Half a core.
just to sell. That's out of my half, but was the 5% shrinkage for the year, the 9 cob on my core, had all that already happened, or had only half of that happened, or had only a little bit of that happened, which is then they're going to,
You're absolutely right. Now we start asking all those questions: is how did it happen? When did it happen? And who should bear the responsibility? And that's again goes back to why did you do it in the first place?
Excuse me, Rabbi.
Yeah, go ahead.
We're talking of percentages and all kinds of things. If the whole story is based on volume, then
Right.
you have, let's say you have a big bin, which is the amount he was given, or a big storage container
Right,
that filled to the top.
right.
Isn't he only required to give back? So if he added stuff, it would spill over or whatever, but he's required to give back the same volume rather than trying
Minus a certain amount.
percentages.
Yeah,
It's based on volume, not based on just the other kinds of measurements.
no, but
right. These
because-
are all volume measurements. Yeah.
Right, but again, because of the shrinkage factor, that volume is going to decrease. So the Gemara's kasha here is, it's easy enough to figure if his volume was separated out, to give him back what's in there, because it's no difference
But
to
if
you.
it's mixed together, you can't ever separate them.
But then the Gemara asks the kasha, why not? Let's just see what the proportions started with and use those proportions all the way through. If he gave me 4 and I had 1, which means I had 20% of the total, then let me give him back with shrinkage 80% of the total, which on paper sounds pretty good, except for the fact that I, the shomer, started using it during the course of the year. What did I use? I used the mixture. I don't know what I used, but I used the mixture. So if I used the mixture, how much did I use? That I should now know how much to give back to the other guy.
That's
Gemara
working.
says-
But you're assuming right now that there's segregation of a different species of grain, or you're not assuming a mixture, are you?
We're assuming one grain, but I've got my wheat field right next to the other guy's wheat field, so I'm taking care of his wheat field because he's out of town.
Oh, if are you asking?
And I harvest it all, I measure it, I throw it all in my one silo.
Yeah, you're not asking whether he's mixing.
Fungible.
You're not asking whether he's mixing flax and wheat or something else.
Right.
It's all the same grain. Whatever the
okay,
grain we're
okay.
talking about is the same.
All right, that makes it
except I've
easier.
got mine and yours, right?
All right, okay.
Right. So then the Gemara says, what's the big deal? So the Gemara says, it is a big deal because we don't know what he took. The left kama aspect, and for the Gemara, the kama is stopping. We don't know how much he took. So it's not so easy to figure out because we don't know whether he took a half of a core or he took more. So again,
Well, we
This
should
one-
be able to know how much he took. The problem is we don't know how that relates to how much shrinkage there is.
how much shrinkage there is. Right. Right.
Actually, that could be another flip side, is if he said, well, I took whatever I took, and there was 5 core total, 4 of mine and 1 of yours, and I took some out, I didn't measure it, but we know the shrinkage is 5%. So at the end, you get such and such amount, and I get such and such amount based on what's there, and therefore that determine indirectly how much I took, except of course that the shrinkage could vary during the year, and then it's the same problem again.
But
Right.
also depending on when the mixtures happen, because his stuff's going to shrink also.
That's right. And but again, we don't know if it's in the full year cycle, whether the achbar will eat more in the winter than the summer, or whether there will be it's not going to necessarily be a proportionate eating every day of the year, right?
You do know the date that they were mixed.
Right. So as long as everything is status quo, we can figure it out more easily. But once you start picking it apart, then you have the problem of how to accurately measure what belongs to the shomer and what belongs to the other guy. So again, it's not that simple because we have
Not simple, because the grain all looks the same. It's
Right.
the adjacent field.
Exactly.
So you always have to estimate things here.
Yeah, yeah, but we're trying to be as fair as possible
Right, right.
and not by not having him shave off more than what he should be entitled to. That's again, the Gemara is dealing in a very moral sort of sense. Is you shouldn't have done it. You should have left it alone. Now that you did it, let's try to repair it to the extent that we can, and you can give him what's rightfully his. Okay, so that's the second sheet. The third sheet was of Yehuda's. The Yehuda Omer im Hoysa. In other words, if he had a large amount, then we do not offset at all. Zok the Gemara, second to last line before the wide. Kama mida maruba. What's considered mida maruba? Rashi told us. Asara kurin. If you have 10 kur, that's already a substantial amount where you don't offset. Okay, so that's how the Gemara looks at it. Tanya nami hacha. We saw a brisa. Kama mina maruba asara kurin. All right. So he brings it from a brisa where it was said by other Tanoim, quite beferish, that the 10 kur constitutes a large enough amount that you don't do any offsetting. Fine, okay. So now, Tana Kamed Rav Nachman, there was a Tana who was interpreting different Mishnahs and brises, and he came to Rav Nachman. And now he said to Rav Nachman,
I can't,
You're frozen.
frozen.
Is the rabbi frozen or is all?
You're frozen, Rabbi Grauman.
Yeah, I can see everybody else. I can hear everybody else. I assume people can hear me, but can't hear the rabbi.
I can hear you, but can he hear you?
His video's frozen. I guess he's going to dial back in. We didn't hit the amount of time that you get cut off on this.
No. We're on unlimited.
Unlimited, yeah. Check with the Chinese.
Jay, how are you feeling?
I'm fine. I just got banged up. My knees.
Yeah, there's a crack on the floor there, you know.
What's that?
The county's gonna send you a bill. There's a crack down there.
Well, concrete is pretty hard. It could have been a million times worse.
Now you know.
Well,
Yeah, you were frozen.
okay, so I'm back. Okay, so what? Okay, so where we picked up is the Gemara now wants to explain in this 10 cabin what we're talking about when we're talking about a large amount. So it's brought from a brisa as follows. So this a Tanakama that said before of Nachman, but Me'devar Mamurim, when do we say with regard to the 10 Purim that it's a large amount and therefore there is no offset? Shemodad lo mitoch garano, v'hichsa lo mitoch garano. What this means is that the person, the mafkid, the person who was giving the 10 kur to be held, had himself a very large granary, and he was asking, he's Ruvain, and he was asking Shimon, hold 10 kur for me. So what did he do? He went to his granary, he's a professional, and he took a measurer that he keeps in his granary, measured out 10 kur, and gave that 10 kur to Shimon to hold. Now, there are two types of measures. There's a professional measurement that professionals use, and then there is a different type of measuring implement that sort of the balabatim use, that people use, not the professional.
We have that today. If you get a scale it'll say, the ordinary one says, not for, some
Not for
legal term
professional
for it,
use
not,
or not for, right, exactly. So here, if he is taking 10 kur with the professional scale or the professional, whatever, and then he gets back the and he returns mitoch Gorono, then we say no offset. Aval modad lo mitoch Gorono, if Ruvain took with his measure and gave him 10, and then Shimon came after the year, v'hichselo mitoch beso, and he gave him 10 from his household measurer, then ena yotzelo chesronos mipnei shemosiros. Now we have a different situation, says the Gemara, that you don't deduct. In other words, if it's measure for measure, okay, that then it is what it is. But if it's not measure for measure, if he gave it to him with the professional measure in use, and he got back the non-professional, then there's a different amount that's given back in the smaller than the large. Then we say that there is no offset. There is no offset. So in other words, the Gemara now, he wants to interpret that depending. This is a new, introducing a brand new concept. Now it depends on what measurer you use. If you use like kind measurements and there is less now than before, you have to offset. But if you're not using like kind and you're giving him back with a smaller measurer, then he says that the same amount of, if you're going to say 10 kur, there won't be any offset because that small measurer will make up the difference. So let's take a look at Rashi. How does this happen? What does this mean? Lechze didei kama hava. V'yira kama milsi kama chosro v'yitlu al shol chavera kefi cheshbon. Midas hagoren hoyse yusera al shel batim. The measure of the goran was more than that of which is used in homes. Therefore, when he is giving him back from the smaller measurer, then he makes up the difference, he says, and therefore there is no offset. So that's his chiddush, is that we have to understand exactly what he's using. Okay, Amalei v'chi b'shuftani askinan. Are we dealing with a fool? The Yava b'kaila rabba b'shakla b'kaila zuta. Are we dealing with a fool who dishes out with a large measure and he gets back with a small measure? I mean, this guy obviously is a professional. He's got a granary. He's got the measuring sticks. What is he telling to this guy? He says, "Okay, I'll take your smaller measure." That's not the way it works. So then the Gemara says, no. The lashon is different. Dilma b'yamos hagorin ka'amrin. He didn't mean a large granary or a measuring stick or a small measuring stick. He said b'yamos hagorin ka'amrin. When do we say that it's shaveh shemadad lo b'yamos hagoren v'hifsel lo b'yamos hagoren? That when he gave it to him after the summer season, when it was dried out and it was completely, in that state, he gave it to him, and then he gets it back in that state. Then you measure 1 for 1, because now you know if the achbarim ate, because you're dealing with dried food and dried food. So if the achbarim ate, they will have eaten from the dried food, and we'll know how much there is. But if he measured out in the dry season, and then he got it back in the rainy season, and we know that in the rainy season things expand, and a yotzelo chasarn mipnei shemosros. Then now we have a different situation. He doesn't have to give the difference because of the expansion. So the expansion will make the kernels larger, and he will have the same sort of weight or the same amount because it will be saturated with the rain. So that's how the Gemara wants to interpret it. It has nothing to do with the measure, and it has to do with when this transaction took place. If it was dry and dry, then it's equal. If it's dry and wet, then you don't return. Then there is no shrinkage because the shrinkage is made up by the difference. So we'll do
Are we
like-
still talking just volume now, or rather than weight, or what are we?
it's weight because heavier goren will weigh more than dry goren. So if they measured out 10 kur and he comes back with 10 kur, okay, I got what I bargained for. The 10 kur is a little bit less volume but more weight because of the rain. That's okay. But if it's in the dry season and he got back 10, then there really wasn't any shrinkage. The achbar didn't eat because it's dry versus dry, and he got back the same 10. But if he got back 9.5, then he would know that the achbar ate 1/2, and that's what he has to give him.
Sure, thank you.
So that's how, again, they have their sophistication in terms of understanding Mekach and Memker, how things work. He says, what, you think I'm a fool that I don't know there's a difference between a large measure and a small measure, or between winter and summer? They knew all this stuff. They were not that behind the times. So now, he's asking an interesting question. If in fact it's talking about that he got it in the dry and he came back in the wet, then the barrel that he's giving to him should burst because it now will be more than there was before, and if it was packed, then it would explode. So he said, so can we tell based on what's in the barrel that he's giving him? So he answers him, Hava Avda, there was a situation with Paka Kada. And yes, you're absolutely right. There was a situation where he gave him back so much that the barrel split because there was more in there because of the expansion of the rain, of the weather. Or you can say, no, there really was more, but because the grain was packed so tight in the barrel, it couldn't expand. In other words, the moisture couldn't even get in because there was no room for the moisture to expand. So, I mean, two different ways of looking at it. So let's just see Rashi. So Rashi is going to explain. Bekaila b'mida yemos hagorin samachli yavshan. Around the time of the dry season, it's baked by the chama, so it's completely dry. When he returns it in the rainy season, so in case of the truck, since it will expand, lifka kada, let the kada explode. If you feel chitin osaorim, bimosa goren, v'gafen esakad yifka bimosa gishamim machmas teficha hatvua. Then it'll seep in and it will break the barrel because there will be, I guess the natural expansion. The barrel won't be able to hold it. So one shita says yes, that actually happened. Another shita says it is a doichek. It was tight. Mitok shehem b'mokum tsar. It was so tightly packed. Nitchi yachad ve'ein tfuchit. So there is no moisture that can come in. What's the bottom line? The bottom line here is that we look at this whole Indian as being how do two people who want to transact business, how do they transact in those days? So again, there were rules. The rule is if you're going to be a shomer, don't mix it. Fine, that's the easiest. Once you mix it, then the Gemara gives you all of these permutations and said, well, if you mix it, this is what you have to do. You have dry and wet, and you have big and small. So again, the Gemara is giving us all the different possibilities of what might happen between two people who are trying to transact. He's trying to be a shomer, he's trying to help the fellow. And so the Gemara gives us different understandings of what the circumstance might be. Bottom line, first of all, follow what Chazal tells us. If you're a shomer, keep it separate. This way you won't even run into any issues. But once you run into issues, then you have to start making accommodations. And the mafkid, the one who gave it, has to realize that if he did, either he knew or didn't object to the fact that they would be mixed, then he has to accept a certain amount of shrinkage or not. Then now we go back to that previous Gemara we had on Lamed Ches, the machlokes between Tanakh and Shimon Gamliel. What do you do when you actually have shrinkage? do you salvage or do you not? So in fact, this Mishnah should be first, and then we should go to the other Mishnah and ask the question, now that there is a mixture and he has no instruction, what should he do? Should he sell it to salvage for the owner, or should he not touch it at all? And then, so then again, that's that Mishnah, that discussion. But you see that in the time of the Gemara, they had all of these issues that today, I mean, maybe it's more sophisticated. We have other ways of dealing with it in the world of agriculture. I don't know exactly how that works today and what the halachas are.
Well, for one thing, nowadays they actually have moisture sensors. So if you think that, oh, it's heavier or it didn't lose as much because of the moisture, you could actually document it, what it was when it went in, and what it was when it came out.
Right. Okay. So today that takes the place. But you see that they were not that unsophisticated, that they didn't have ways of trying to measure what was fair between the mafkid and the nifkid. After all, we're talking about a shemachinam here. Talking about someone who's doing him a favor. He's not getting paid for this, so clearly we don't want to dock him for taking off, for giving him less by doing a favor. So again, the Gemara tries to be a little bit balanced here and tell us how we should go. So we'll stop here. And interestingly, the next Mishnah will talk about this inyan, but with regard to liquid. This Mishnah talked about solids. We talked about grain. We talked about now the next Mishnah is going to talk about oil and wine, which has a different proportion of how we deal with it, and we'll have that similar discussion, Mitzvah Shem, in dealing with people who store wine or oil for other people, and what happens to the barrel, et cetera, et cetera. You can imagine what that will look like. So Mitzvah Shem, we'll continue here on Mem Amud Aleph on the next Mishnah next week.
Nice to see you.
Again, we're getting a broad picture as you learn different Masechtas how life was at the time of the Tanoim and the Amoraim. And by the way, as a footnote, this whole discussion is only, even though it's in Bavel, they're saying other places other than here had different ways of doing it. So the Chazal tell us this, what we learned today isn't what happened everywhere in sort of Klal Yisrael at the time of this of the writing of the Gemara and the Mishnah. In other words, this is what happened is probably referencing Bavel or the places that they were. But in Yerushalmi or in other places, they may have had different ways of approaching it, which is interesting that, again, it's not one size fits all. This was the way it was. I happen to see that the Mefarshim say, yeah, Dafka here and at that time, but another place, okay, they had their own way of working the system. So anyway, it's an interesting discussion, and Mitzvah next week we'll pick it up.
Good.
Yeah.